Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
We cannot yet know his legendary head, with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with the brilliance from inside, like a lamp in which his gaze, now turned to low, gleams in all of its power. Otherwise, the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile run through the placid hips and thighs to that dark center where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders, and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not, from all the borders of itself, burst like a star. For here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. That is The Archaic Torso of Apollo by Rainier Maria Rilke. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages. We also discuss a variety of esoteric, occult, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, art, science, philosophy, technology, and so much more. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice, that means that magic, like this show, is for you if you want it. There are a lot of different ways to be more free, and using magic or making space for spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree with me sometimes. How will we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things at all times, after all, anyway? And like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I am always willing to revise my opinions based on new evidence, and this happens often. So very stoked to bring you an awesome conversation I had with Michael M. Hughes. We cover a lot of really cool territory, including getting into one of my pet obsessions about the intersections of the trickster, the magician, and the stage magician, and what all this has to do with magic and even phenomena and stuff. Michael also shares about the ritual he created, which ended up being propelled to viral fame, and what some of the experiences surrounding that were like. The spell to bind that reality TV star that the US elected back in 2016. We also get into the rationale that went into the spell's design. There's some really good stuff about the history of the tarot as well, and some debunking of popular myths. Spoiler alert, it's not from ancient Egypt, but that doesn't make it any less cool or interesting. And there are a lot of useful thoughts about approaching a magical practice from the perspective of curiosity and much more. It was a really rad conversation that I think people will find really helpful, so very stoked to share it. During a break, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green Sphere, a protection and healing ritual I'll be conducting on June 8th. I'm really excited about it. There's the old saying, think globally, act locally, and that's kind of part of the idea with the Green Sphere. I'm creating a pretty cool sacrificial object to burn, and we're going to be getting a bit theatric with it at the circle as we raise a powerful sphere of protective and healing energy before sending it to where it needs to go, both locally and globally. I've written a simplified version of it that can be conducted alone or in a group, which people can do if they are into participating. And that's going to be, as I said, on June 8th, and we're planning to light the candle for that at 9 p.m. Eastern, but I'm sure any time around there will be just as effective. This episode is being released late in the evening of May 23rd, well, at least in my time zone. And we will celebrate by hearing a couple of the books of the Green Mushroom Project's 23 Bibliomancy scripture. This is a sort of giant cut-up that we've been conducting for the last 21 months. We're going to be discovering book 22, so we're almost done. There's also going to be updates about what we have going on with the Mushroom Hyposigil Project, listener mail, and more. Before we get into the fun here, let me remind you that you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod. I always love hearing people's thoughts, questions, suggestions, arcane revelations, and whatnot. Although I'm a pretty introverted person and I don't use social media very much because it's kind of a fucking lot, that doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from people. Just don't be dismayed if it takes me a couple days to get back to you or something like that. If you like this show and the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option who don't wish to do the whole Patreon rigmarole but still wish to support the show with a one-time donation. Both of these things are very helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is already doing that. Your support literally makes this show possible by allowing me to cover the cost associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the time that I spend. I appreciate the opportunity to be making this thing and to be talking to all these cool people and being able to share all these awesome ideas and techniques and shit, and it really wouldn't be possible without you all, so I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. As I said, really excited to share my conversation with Michael M. Hughes. Let me first set the table, though, by defining the term reality tunnel, because it comes up in the interview. I'm going to quote from a Medium.com article written by Mikola Bielakonsky called Introduction to Reality Tunnel, a Tool for Understanding the Postmodern World. And the book Quantum Psychology by Robert Anton Wilson also has a good explanation of this concept too, and is kind of set up to be read by a book club in which you can discuss the concepts with your friends or whatever. Mikola writes of reality tunnels. My goal here is to extract and explain the core of this powerful idea in a way that's easy to understand. Thank you, Mikola. It looks like this. Okay, 1. We are all of us, currently and constantly, awash in an unfathomable amount of sensory input. Everything in your field of view, every background sound, the taste of the air, how your body feels, etc., etc., etc. 2. To exist in the world is to filter out all of the information down to just the set of observations that we can manage. No two people, given the same set of sensory input, will filter them down in the exact same way. 3. Our sense of the world, of the nature of reality itself, is contained at all times by which sensory observations we allow through our filters. This means we are always operating from a filtered position. 4. All of the facts that we believe, all of the values that we project onto the world, all of the actions that we take, these are all based on that filtered position. We have removed most of our sensory experiment and then constructed a, quote, reality out of what remains. Robert Anton Wilson called this a reality tunnel. Isn't it weird, then, that we don't, as a society, have a good vocabulary for talking about these filters? Understanding that our realities are subjective and malleable gives us access to a tremendous power. We can control the filters we use. We can, quote, change the channel, as Wilson puts it, and tune into different realities at will. We don't have to stay locked in one. In fact, people trying to stay locked in one reality is one of the roots of most major conflict. We can slide between reality tunnels by consciously choosing to pay attention to things we might normally ignore. It's hard at first, but it's a skill that we can develop with practice. Train yourself to pay more attention to the emotions of the people you're speaking to, for instance, and you'll be surprised at how much richer the world gets. Train yourself to pay attention to your caloric intake, and eating fundamentally changes. Train yourself to hear the voices of minorities, and suddenly you see racism and sexism everywhere. This, incidentally, is why activism works. This is also why magic works. Reality is malleable. All right, thank you, Mikola, and thank you to Medium.com. So this is a really important concept for me in how I navigate the world and how I think about magic and a lot of other shit, right? We're always looking through these different experiential lenses based on our own education and life experiences and stuff like that. And then there's this sort of physiological thing where we're filtering out a lot of sense data as well. So I think this is a really important touchstone. I recently took a philosophy class through Morbid Anatomy with James Madden about the phenomena and unidentified flying hyperobjects. I think a hypersigil is a type of hyperobject, by the way. So a concept like reality tunnels was brought up in that class, but it was a sort of adjacent term called an Umwelt, which was coined by Jakob von Hughes, definitely butchered that, apologies, who was a Baltic German biologist that lived from 1864 to 1944. Here's a definition of an Umwelt from Britannica.com. The capabilities of an animal's sense organs differ depending on the behavior and ecological constraints of the species. In recognition of this fact, and of the equally important fact that animals perceive their environments differently than do humans, ethologists have adopted the word Umwelt, a German word for environment, to denote an organism's unique sensory world. Okay, so that's sort of like a biological look at it through the lens of biology, if you will. Getting into a little bit more philosophical terms, in an article for thephilosopher.com, Tim Elmo Fenton breaks down Jakob's concept of the Umwelt. I wanted to share it, not just to help elucidate the term, but also because I think it's really interesting. There's a huge difference in tone in looking at this same concept from a magical perspective versus a maybe more philosophical or scientific one. And I think that there's some interesting ground to be mined here. Tim writes of Jakob, his notion of Umwelt has also deeply unsettling consequences for the way that we understand the world and our place in it. Jakob's thought is a threefold provocation. 1. He posits a world of experience for each living creature that is strictly beyond the reach of scientific knowledge, offering the boundless optimism in science engendered by centuries of technical success and cultural dominance. 2. None of these Umwelten, plural Umwelts, has a different metaphysical status than the others. So there's not one that's more real than the others. Since we, humans, including human scientists, are also living creatures, the world we each experience and study gives us no privileged access to an objective truth about a mind-independent world. The claim that each human individual experiences a private, phenomenal world of its own and can never access the Umwelt of anyone else has deeply disturbed many thinkers. The philosophical reaction of Jakob's thought, especially strong in France and Germany, has developed a range of very different strategies for warding off this view, and for the social and moral implications that are feared to follow from such a phenomenal individualism. But none of these provocations has been resolved in a truly satisfying way, and perhaps the persistence of these disturbing questions goes some way towards explaining the historically continuous scholarly interest in Jakob's thought. The recent uptick in deeper engagement shows that his thought is still unsettling enough to provoke a wide range of strong reactions. All right, thanks so much to Tim Elmo Featon and thephilosopher.com. So yeah, I think that is a really interesting difference there. When we're looking at it from Robert Anton Wilson's perspective, it's like, oh, we can change the channel, fuck yeah, and from the maybe a little bit more conservative perspective, it's like, oh shit, like, what are you telling me? That, like, the world that I think is, like, for real, true, forever, like, absolutely isn't that way? That's very scary. So, yeah, I love that difference there. All right, now that the table is all set with our reality tunnels and Umwelts, let me go ahead and introduce my guest. So Michael M. Hughes is an author, speaker, magical thinker, and activist. He's the creator of the internationally viral spell to bind Donald Trump, which was the largest magical working in history. He speaks on politics, magic, pop culture, psychedelics, the paranormal, and tarot. He also has a tarot course, which people can check out, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the tarot as we get into it here. All right, I'm going to be back during a break to share about the Green Sphere ritual, as well as share some 23 bibliomancy, but now let's get into it. Here's my chat with Michael M. Hughes. And to take us into that, let's hear a track from the Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollowed digital mixtape, Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2. This is Reality Tunnels by Knive.
Moving way ahead of us and kind of quietly sitting in the future and in very low key.
End of life, shit cavalry's charging. No rally for my plundering army. Just me, unarmed but dangerous. My routine remains spontaneous, contemporaneous, and ain't babble. Attempting to run as fast as pain travels. Tempted and spun, undone, unraveled. Solitaire game, little short of a full deck. Volatile change fell from the apex. Like acid rain, rearrange context. Can't contain my dread over what's next.
To move into new space is the only way new realities can be created, the fastest way. To move into new space is the only way new realities can be created, the fastest way.
Pristine visage, I got that brand new eye to witness this tarnished perfection. Ripped down, stripped to rawness, assaulted wound to harness. My chemical burn fucked up and flawless. All this nonsense busted dust. All this fuss gone in a gust. Enough, I'm up above now, never coming back down. Let me run it back now. Act now, cause the stagnation's astounding. Incessant pounding, blind to violent surroundings. So insulated, sedation and comfort. This is still the world, bitch. Don't get what hurt. Muster the gusto, one fluster with muscle. Hard heartbeats, beat concussive concrete. Creep like a weed, green psychedelic chlorophyll in defiance of the mindlessness as I am
To
will.
move into new space is the only way new realities can be created, the fastest way. To move into new space is the only way new realities can be created, the fastest way.
Well, my guest today is Michael M. Hughes. Michael, how's it going?
It's going great, thanks. I'm really excited to have a conversation today.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to talk with you. There's so many different things that I want to get into today. First of which, and why I originally reached out to you is because you've done some very interesting and work that ended up becoming somewhat visible along the lines of magical resistance. You have a book, Magic for the Resistance, which is hard to find now, but I was able to snag myself one of the remaining copies of it.
Oh, good. Happy to hear it.
And as well as talking about the tarot, you've got some interesting stuff going on with that, including a tarot magic class that I am stoked to hear more about. But before we get into that, would you like to go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and tell the listeners anything that I didn't share about you just now?
Yeah, sure. Well, yes, there was a particular ritual that kind of propelled me to some viral fame back in the previous election cycle, and that was quite a ride. Because of that, I wrote the book Magic for the Resistance, Rituals and Spells for Change. And like you said, that's getting hard to find. It's out of print now, so if people want to get a copy, it's a little harder to get it. I think the ebook is, of course, still a way to purchase the book, but it was really a wild ride. It was something completely unexpected.
Mm.
I really felt like what happened in that experience is I kind of gave like a voice to currents that were already sort of bubbling and kind of gave a name to it. But certainly the more I investigated the history of magic as a tool of resistance, the more I realized, it's always been part of magical traditions, because often those traditions are used by powerless people. They have no other way to achieve agency in life, especially if you're an enslaved person or you're a very poor person. Sometimes the only way you really can claim a sense of power is through magic and rituals and spiritual practices. So it was really a wild ride. I was invited on like the Tucker Carlson show and stuff like that, which I refused because I refused to like lend myself to platforms that are racist and bigoted and just horrible.
Sure.
But it got that big that people were really talking about this subject. And the other thing that I found interesting about that is, as far as giving a voice, I was just lucky to be the person who became the voice of this sort of movement. The other thing that I really was fascinated by and I found very humbling is the number of people that this particular ritual gave their first taste of magic.
Mm.
This is the first time they did a ritual because they were so frustrated politically and just, they felt like there was nothing they could do to stop this fire hose of horrible stuff that was happening in light of that election, that they would do anything. And a lot of them said, why not? I'll do this magical ritual. And for so many of them that reached out to me, they said, I didn't expect how powerful this was. I didn't expect doing a ritual and, lighting a piece of paper on fire, how profound that made me feel. So it was a fascinating time, and a lot of that stuff is still going on. And I feel remarkably privileged to have been able to give a voice to so many people and what they were feeling.
Yeah, fuck yeah, I love that. So I feel like we've buried the lead a little bit here. And I do want to point out that like the principles of what you said, like this could apply to any situation. But for people that might be wondering, like, okay, well, what are we talking about here? What happened, right? So could you kind of take us back to that like moment in time, and maybe for people who are listening in other countries other than the United States, like what was that kind of climate like, and what was going on with your ritual to bind the orange dude?
Yeah, it's almost like I hate saying his name. His name is
Yeah,
just
I
so
prefer not
loaded,
to.
I love to talk around it, like Voldemortish sort of
Indeed.
thing. But well, yes, it was after the 2016 election, and so many people I knew were just dispirited and broken by what had happened. And immediately after the election, like we all knew what was coming, and I think a lot of us knew how bad it was going to be. And some people were trying to suggest that, it might not be that bad. He talks a lot of talk and all that. But
We elected a reality TV star. I'm sure it'll be fine.
You're right. So, after the election, all this nightmarish stuff was happening. Like one of the first things was like the Muslim ban. And, I just remember like people walking around in shock, like, oh man, this is going to be as bad as we feared it would be. And I had always been an activist, like I just was born with like activist tendencies, even as a kid. I hated to see injustice, and I would stand up for other kids when I felt like the teachers were giving them a hard time. And, that got me in trouble. So I quickly learned that, if you stand up for things that you believe in, sometimes that can get you in trouble. I mean, it's just good trouble,
Sure.
that kind of concept. So, but after the election, like seeing so many people just beaten down and like in shock at the things that were happening, I thought, okay, I've got to do something. But what is that something? And I was talking with a friend one night. We're having a couple of beers and we're just like racking our brains. And I thought, well, do we do like a big event and give the money to Planned Parenthood or something like that? Do we like throw a party to have like positive energy to push back? Because I always think, like bringing positive energy into bad situations and it is a good way to combat just that depression and that despair that so many people were feeling. But I couldn't really think of anything that was resonating. And then being a magical practitioner, I thought, what if I just do a ritual, like a ritual that people do together at the same time, no matter where they are, to like focus all our energy and our intention on pushing back against all this horrible stuff that we were seeing. And I told my friend, and he kind of thought it was kind of goofy. He's used to my weird ideas and things like that. So, but I couldn't shake it. So I wrote this ritual. I shared it with some of my friends in the magical community, and they provided some suggestions. And it was called The Ritual to Bind He Who Shall Not Be Mentioned and All Those Who Abet Him. And I tried to make it I tried to inject some humor into it, so I used like a stubby orange candle as one of the elements, for his stubby orange whatever,
Yeah, and I love
fingers maybe.
yeah, I love I love the comments that you'd made about this about the importance of humor too, because I think that that's a really important thing to add in there as well.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So, and the original ritual used like fool's gold and things like that. But I structured it like a binding spell, and that, and the idea was to bind this grotesque person to keep them from doing harm and to eventually drive him from office. That was part of the ritual from the very beginning. It's like, not only do we want to stop you from doing harm or push back on any harm, minimize any harms that you're going to do, but we want to drive you from office, like for good. We want to get you out.
Mm.
And a lot of people initially were like, well, it's not working, is it? But my response is always, this stuff takes a while.
Sure.
This is the most powerful person on the planet as far as elected office goes. And magic takes time sometimes.
Anybody that's gardened, you don't go and put a seed in the ground and come back the next day like, oh, I guess it didn't work, right?
Exactly,
Exactly.
So I published this on Medium because I had some success publishing stuff on Medium before and getting people to read it. And the wild thing was, it just immediately exploded. Mm. And I was not ready for that at all. I'd had some minor viral stuff in the past, pop culture sort of things, but this was like instantly, like I would refresh the page and watch the numbers go up by the hundreds. And within like a day, it was clear that this was a rocket ship, like it was escape velocity virality. And I was freaked out. I mean, I had a day job at a university, and I'm just sitting in my office and emails start popping up from like CNN and ABC and from, overseas media outlets. And
all of a sudden, a lot of attention.
All of a sudden, yeah. So I like carefully closed my office door and I put like a little sign like, on the phone, do not disturb, because I was just getting all of these media requests. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And like I said, Tucker Carlson's trying to get me on a show, and Fox and Friends was inviting me on. But what everyone wanted, because I had picked a date, I had picked the waning crescent moon to do this, for like magical reasons, but also because I love the look of the waning crescent moon. It's beautiful. And I thought, if people do this, and originally I thought it might be like 20 or 30 people, but all of a sudden it was clear that there were going to be thousands or tens of thousands of people doing this. So I wanted to hitch it to something specific. And so I picked midnight on the waning crescent moon. So it was February something. And that was coming up quickly. So all of the news media were like, hey, can we film you doing this? Can you let us know where there are some groups doing this so we could film it? Like they all want, this is like every major media news outlet. And I was kind of freaked out, I'm like, I have a family. Am I going to put them in danger if I'm on TV?
There's a lot of kooks out there, yeah.
All right. But the TV stations, they were like, we have to see this. So as the date got closer, they were just more and more insistent. So I started asking around, and most of like the witch people I knew, the pagan people I knew that were going to do it, they're like, no way, man, we're not going to like put ourselves on TV doing this. So, and the friends that I had that were going to do this, and suddenly it blew up from a handful of us to like 40 or 50 were like, yes, let's do this. They also said, look, man, it's better if we stay off major TV.
Sure.
And especially if people know where we're doing it, we'll probably be hounded by crazy people. So I did something that's very out of character for me, and I lied. I remember telling CNN, I said, I hear there's people are going to be doing it at Trump Tower. And they were like, great, we'll send the camera crews there. And instantly I was like, oh, should I have said that? Wasting people's time. So then the night arrived, and we picked one of my friend's backyards in Baltimore City, but it was like a nice wooded little backyard. He had a big fire pit, and people, all of a sudden, all these other people are like, hey, can I come do this with you? And I kept hearing from people like, I was in the grocery store in London and I heard two people talking about your ritual. And so it was just like I was in a daze because it all happened so fast and I was so freaked out. And so, being my friends, if I'm going to get them together to like do anything, they want me to bring like some adult refreshment. So I remember that night I stopped at a liquor store. And I bought, I had all this case of beer and some wine and stuff like that. And the woman who was checking me out, she was like in her 20s or something. And she said, wow, looks like you're having a party. And I said, well, yeah, we're doing a binding ritual tonight to stop, that dude.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, oh, do you have the unflattering photo that you're going to burn? And like, that gif of
it
like
comes
the guy,
full circle.
that
I love
gif
it.
of the guy's head exploding, like, I mean, that's how I felt. And I was
Fuck yeah.
I just like in shock. So I arrive, we do the ritual. It was amazing. Like we live streamed it on Facebook and there were like thousands of people watching this live stream. And when we finished the ritual, like I just kind of like almost collapsed and I'm sitting on this tree stump in my friend's backyard away from the fire. And, everybody's buzzing with the energy and stuff. And one of my friends came up with his phone and he had CNN on his phone and he stuck it in my face. He's like, look at this. And there were witches sitting outside of Trump Tower doing that ritual. And it's hard to describe what I was feeling at that point. Here was this thing that like a week before I had just come up with and thrown up on the internet thinking, some people will enjoy this. And it became like a cultural thing. It became like the biggest thing that had happened to like witches and I'm not even a witch. Like I don't consider myself a witch. I consider myself a magician, but suddenly like witches became the face of the opposition to this guy and everything he was doing. And it still boggles my mind when I think about it. So yeah, that's like the condensed version of this experience. And, it just kept rolling. It's still rolling. Now that he's coming around again for his second shot at office, our original goal of driving him from office, like it's reignited people's desire to do this again.
Yeah, right on. So could we get into a little bit of the mechanics of this thing and the symbology and maybe some of your rationale behind like the design of it and stuff like that?
Sure. Do you have specific questions or you just want me to like talk about how I thought about it?
Well, I know that it's contextualized as like, a non-harmful thing and stuff like that, which I think is looking at the historical way that a lot of this was done, I do think actually makes a lot of sense. Just from even if you're not, even if you don't think that's important ethically, I think that even you could make the argument just for pragmatism that makes sense. And so, I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about that. And
Yeah, well, part of it was just trying to kind of, keep mobs from storming my house.
Oh, sure.
Or to keep the Secret Service from, knocking on my door, which thankfully they didn't do.
Advocating for harming a public official is not a
Right.
wise thing to do. Right?
Exactly, or if something or if something had happened, then having people turn their focus on us as like the cause of it, or some unhinged person claiming that they're a witch assassin or something like that. So it was very I mean, like I said, I have a family, and I didn't want us to have to like go underground because of something terrible happening. But also, I wanted this to be something that people could embrace, and some horrible malefic curse it just has its own ramifications and problems. So I looked to the issue of binding, the idea, and binding spells go back to like some of the earliest spells on the record. You know, it's like stop so and so from coming near my spouse and things like that. And a lot of binding spells are very malefic in their intention, but I wanted to keep this like sort of, you know, very straightforward. Like we want to stop harm, you know, very clearly this person can do remarkable harm, has incredible power to do harm.
It's like a harm reduction ritual.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. So that was part of the mechanism of it. And the humor, again, as you mentioned, malignant narcissists hate nothing more than when people laugh at them and mock them and don't take them seriously. So that was like,
Emperor wears no clothes. Yes, indeed.
yeah. So that was part of the spell from the get-go, is the idea that we laugh, you know, and it feels so powerful. And there's that idea of the witch's laughter. And so all these sort of elements were going through my mind as I was putting this ritual together. And again, you know, I like polished it and played with it and things like that, but I wanted the humor to be essential. I feel humor also pulls people in and makes it less, you know, spooky or weird. And the fact that so many people who had never done any sort of magic before took part in this and found value in it. Like, I feel like that was a helpful aspect, to have some humor, to have some lightness to it, but also very, you know, when thinking of magic, I used to be, my introduction to magic was like chaos magic and stuff like that. So I've always had a very flexible conception of how magic is done. But I also got like, after that, I got like real deep in Golden Dawn style hermetic magic. And so there was this idea that like the more elaborate the ritual, you know, and the more powerful it is, and the more it's calling on all these different
maximalism of the time,
the
I think.
maximalism, yeah, exactly. But over time, like, I realized that I was kind of spinning my wheels in that stuff, and that sometimes the most powerful magic is the most simple thing you can do. So the idea of burning a picture, and I really looked at a lot of photos of this person, and I found one that was just so foul and really just so really kind of, it looks like he's just like spitting venom, you know, his face is contorted, his little anus like mouth is all pinched up, and it was such a perfect image. And to burn that image is like the climax of the ritual. Like, I think, you know, a lot of people don't realize how powerful burning something is. And, you know, I've always been kind of a pyro. I like to burn stuff.
Sure.
But burning an image is just such a powerful symbolic act. And I think a lot of people have never done that before. You know, people burn effigies at protest, and it goes back forever because it's such a powerful and potent act, you know, lighting something on fire and watching that person's face just go up in flames and turn to ash. Like, it's visceral, you know, it's joyful. And so, but what, you know, I may be going a little off again, but what really, I think this ritual, and especially people who have never done magical rituals of any sort before, it made them think, it made them experience like, wow, this shit is real, you know, like, if nothing else, this feels good. Like, it feels great to just light this shit bag on fire and watch it burn up while I'm laughing hysterically at him, while I'm mocking him. And just knowing that so many people maybe got a taste of that for like the first time and maybe thought, this is good, you know, I can continue to do this sort of thing. That's the most,
it's very subversive in a good way, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is that I discovered, you know, I kind of hoped, like, this was kind of subconsciously part of my desire in making this happen, but it really became clear that so many people, this was a way of like recalibrating, like recharging their batteries, because it was so many of us were just beaten down. It was just this ongoing assault of terrible things that were just happening as we're watching like democracy get dismantled, and marginalized people being like demonized, and people being called vermin and bugs, and just I mean, so many of us, like, we wake up, doom scrolling and like, oh my God, what's happening today? But when we would do this monthly, this ritual in the waning crescent moon, I could be like, all right, hey, I'm okay again,
Mhm.
I can go back to my daily, emailing my representatives and going to marches and all that sort of stuff. Like it just sort of recharged our energetic batteries. And that was a beautiful thing to see. Like that was the other really rewarding aspect of this whole experience, is like giving people something to recharge their spiritual batteries.
Yeah, right on. I love that. So, and I know that this was not something that was meant to like be harmful or anything, but there were some kind of funny synchronicities that ended up, or maybe they weren't synchronicities, but just, events that were coincidental that ended up happening, involving some of the symbolism and some events. I'm hoping you could mention that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that sort of really freaked me out was lightning hit his tower.
Hmm.
And the card we were using in the ritual is the Tarot Tower card. And it plays an important role in the ritual. It's like, bringing down his tower of vanity is how it's referred to, striking down his tower of vanity. And then I think it was the night after, or the day after we did this ritual, is when lightning struck the tower. There was also a fire in the tower as well. And for a moment, I'm like, oh shit,
Ruh-roh.
am I going to get the knock on the door now? Which luckily I never did. And honestly, like I had a relative who was very critical of this whole thing, and he's like, man, you're going to get a knock on the door from like the FBI or the Secret Service or something. I'm like, you know what? If they come knocking on my door because I'm doing a ritual, like I'll ride that to the bank.
Yeah,
That's like, you can't get that sort of, publicity. Here comes,
sure.
now the government's, prosecuting people who are doing rituals like that. That would have been wild. I mean, I didn't want that to
Of
happen.
course not. Yeah, we don't want that to happen, but at the same time, it would
Yeah.
also sort of force them to maybe admit something about magic that maybe
Right.
society wouldn't be. I don't know. Yeah, it sounds messy. So,
Yeah, I think it would have been messy. I also designed a sigil because that's been part of my magical practice. That's like one of the first magical things I ever did,
mhm.
was back in the 90s, was like chaos magic, working with sigils. So I designed a sigil, and that immediately blew up. Like, too, people were
Mhm.
using that, and someone, I think the thing about sigils, and I've also designed one to oppose Putin. I did a hex Putin ritual as well, and that, not nearly as big as the other binding thing, but I think what happens when you make a sigil and it clicks, and
Mhm.
I'm sure you probably have felt this yourself, like when you're working with a sigil and you're taking apart elements of words and letters, whatever, and then it just clicks, and this sigil that I created for that, like, clicked, and then people started pointing out things about it, like it looks kind of like the hangman or something like that, and when it's turned on its side, it almost looks like LMAO, or laughing my ass off.
Okay, I love it.
And someone pointed that out at one point. And so when you create a sigil and it really clicks and it really feels like it has power, sometimes there are little clues like that pop up that you have no idea. Like
Yes.
on the Hex Putin sigil, it really looks like the Ukrainian coat of arms. And I didn't even know what the Ukrainian coat of arms looked like. It also looks like someone who's like holding their head, that like they've been beheaded or something like that. So all these like things that come out, synchronicities. And I think the more bigger and the more powerful the ritual you're doing, and of course the binding spell was like the hugest thing I've ever done, and
Sure.
the most people doing it of anything, maybe ever, as far as mass rituals go. The things happen, like that
Mhm.
lightning strike, like that fire, or like seeing something in the sigil that in retrospect you didn't put there consciously, but it just sort of emerges when people start working with it.
I was actually just speaking about synchronicities. I was actually just writing about this very concept on my Discord server last night,
Oh,
about
wild.
an experience I had recently with a sigil that kind of translated itself to me during a meditative trance and what that meant. And so, yeah, I love this. It makes total sense. Hell yeah. So I'm hoping we could get into a little bit of your look at the history of magical activism. I think what we might have tread some similar ground in terms of the things that have inspired our work and stuff like that. Was very much inspired by the Battle of Britain in terms of like looking at these opposing currents and how one could kind of like coordinate efforts to like make a current that would oppose this like sort of hateful current. So that was, although I'm not a huge fan of Dion Fortune as a person, I think that
Yeah.
particular thing that she did was cool.
Sure,
so yeah,
yeah.
hopefully we could get into some of that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I had known about Gerald Gardner's story about his work, opposing the Nazis, whether that really happened or not. It's such a powerful, a powerful story and a beautiful metaphor. And also Dion Fortune's her work as well with the magical Battle of Britain, where she was having people visualize angelic energies like patrolling the coast to keep the Nazis at bay. So I wasn't as familiar with that. And that was interesting to me because that was done via sort of the social media of its time, which was postal mail, She would send out these little training things and visualizations that people would do. So that was a precursor that I wasn't, I kind of knew about it, but I didn't know all the details until I started doing the research from my book. And of course, Gerald Gardner and the witches trying to keep Hitler from invading. And of course, with Gardner and all that, we don't really know how much of that actually happened. But again, it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful myth that definitely informed what I was doing. But there were other things, like in Maryland, where I live, there was an author who wrote kind of sensationalist books on magic and voodoo and things like that. And he had people get together at a cabin and they hexed Hitler. And I ended up finding a copy of the Reader's Digest from 1942, I think it was, where they had written about this. So it became kind of a sensation. And so they had he was a hard drinker, partier guy. So he had all these people show up and they had rum and they were doing this kind of like what we would consider very appropriative and, not so savory voodoo ritual. But it ended by, they stabbed like nails into this dummy of Hitler and somebody played the bongos and eventually they took the Hitler dummy and decapitated it and buried it. So it was this, it was kind of very sensationalistic, not, nowadays if someone did that, they'd immediately be,
Everyone would cancel it.
Everyone would cancel it. I mean, and for good reason, it's like it's like BS voodoo. But at the time, it was like a very, and I hadn't known about this. So it was cool because the more research I did for the book, the more I discovered all of these historical sort of antecedents of people using magic. And even in, recent modern history, people doing things like this. And then, of course, there's like Starhawk and, all the pagan and witchy communities who, were against like nuclear power and nuclear weaponry and things like that. I had known about Starhawk. Like Starhawk's been sort of a hero of mine for a long time. I read The Spiral Dance when it came out. And I loved the fact that she really married activism with paganism and witchcraft and things like that. But the more I dug, like the more I found these like fascinating anecdotes. And of course, like with Vodun, enslaved people, used magic to create, the nation of Haiti and expel the colonialists who had, who were constantly, enslaving them and manipulating them to extract wealth from their country. And there's just these beautiful stories all throughout history. And also, a type of magic that I find really fascinating is hoodoo, conjure, and root work, which grew out of the enslaved people in the U.S. who had to, they had nothing. So their magic was done with, paper and burlap and nails and shards of glass and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to relearn the roots and the herbs and the plants of a new country. And there was, some overlap with Native American spiritual practices and all that. So it was like this cauldron of that birthed a new magic in a new land of people that were enslaved and had nothing. But they still kept their magic, they still kept their spiritual practices alive under the most brutalizing circumstances. So, yeah, I mean, the more I dug and the more I researched, I'm like, God, this could be like a series of books, because wherever you dig, especially in oppressed cultures, you find aspects of people using magic against power.
Oh, fuck yeah. So, speaking about magic and power and everything, I'm hoping we could touch a little bit on your work as, teaching people about tarot and how, like, what type of approach you take there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. First of all, I guess I should be clear that I consider myself a magician. That means I do magic. I was even like a sleight of hand kind of magician.
I was gonna ask about that. I'm glad that you brought that up because I want to ask about this in a way that is related to one of my weird obsessions later.
Bring it on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I was fascinated by, it was the 70s, and magic and the supernatural were just everywhere in popular culture. Like Uri Geller was going around bending spoons, and witchcraft and magic were just in the supernatural, Bigfoot, UFOs, like all that weird stuff
Yeah.
was just, it was the 70s was just, we were soaking in it. It was everywhere, and I just gobbled that stuff up. So I loved like Uri Geller and demonstrations of like psychic energy and things like that. I was into pyramid power. That was really big. I even did a science fair experiment and
Awesome.
went to my state science fair with a pyramid power experiment that I had
Rad.
done. And my favorite part of that was when I got to the state science fair, like everything was organized into categories, like biology's over here, physics is over here. And I remember them like having this discussion, like, where do we put this guy?
That's
Like,
so
we
funny.
don't have a metaphysics section of the science fair, So I was just really into this stuff. And so I found a book that was about psychic magic. It was like it was like mentalism. So it's like magic tricks that look like psychic abilities. And I got so like immersed in that. I loved it because I could do this, this kind of demonstration of psychic ability, and it would freak people out. But it was a trick, So I realized, I think at an early age, like that you can manipulate. Like I never wanted to manipulate people, but I realized how it could be done. So I've always been like really cautious and skeptical when, of like mediums and things like that. When people say they have psychic powers, because I know how easy it is to fool people. And I've even done demonstrations of mentalism for certain groups of people, and they insist that it's not trickery, even though I tell them I'm tricking them. Like I said, like this is all fake. And I did a demonstration once, and a group of people came up to me afterwards and they said, "We know that's not fake." And I said, "No,
You just
no,
have to say that, or else the
right,
men in black will come.
right." I'm like, "No, I
No, for real,
swear."
y'all. I
And
can teach you how to do it.
and they're like, "That's no, nope, there's no way you could have known the name of like my best friend in the third grade.
Yeah,
Like, there's just
right.
no way." And I'm like, "No, it's a trick." So that is an eye opener to me, and that kind of fuels some of my, not skepticism and like the James Randi debunker sort of skepticism, but I'm just always very cautious because I know how to trick people. I know how easy it is. So I've been into where did this question start? Now I'm going off on a tangent.
We were going to talk about teaching people tarot, but I think that this is a great thing to like hit on actually, because I also wanted to touch on I had heard you mention in a couple of other interviews, or maybe just one, but the idea of like if you are going to go out there and look for like a group to do magic with, a coven, an order, a cabal, whatever, what have you,
right?
There can be some pitfalls to that. I've personally had some really bad experiences along those lines and stuff, and I would definitely caution people pretty strongly in that area and stuff. I heard your comments about that, and
Okay. Yeah. When I teach people magic or divination, I am very careful not to align it with any particular belief system, because I personally am still kind of agnostic in a lot of ways. Like, that's why I don't align myself with any particular spiritual belief system. Robert Anton Wilson, he called belief systems BS. And
everybody
I
has
love
them,
that.
and they all stink.
Yes. Yeah, everybody has them and they all stink. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and one of his little maxims was always question other people's BS, but always question your own BS. And I think it's really easy when you get involved in magic or, paganism or witchcraft or something like that, to sort of, your reality tunnel starts to shrink. And like, oh, well, that worked because this particular, this goddess made it happen. So therefore this goddess is real. And I read in this book that she likes this kind of offering, and that, so your reality tunnel starts to contract, and anything outside of that reality tunnel, you sort of dismiss. Whereas,
and I think as long as you're like, if you can approach it as like a game that you're playing. In my personal practice, like it's like, this is a game I'm going to play for a while, and like when I get done with it, I don't have to do it anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and I think of it as sort of, and that's why I like that Robert Anton Wilson idea of a reality tunnel. Is, you're in one reality tunnel, but you could jump into another tunnel for a while. And I like your metaphor of a game too, and it lightens up what you're doing and keeps you from getting rigid. So it's okay to like play in that particular pagan reality tunnel where the gods are this, and this pantheon, you work this way and things like that, but you shouldn't be afraid to sort of transition or jump into something else. And for me, I think always keeping an eye on your own BS is so critical to keep you from becoming rigid, or to keep you from shutting out data that doesn't, work with what you're currently doing. And so I always tell people, like, it's okay to do magic and not be certain about how it works or why it works. There are many, many ways of thinking about magic, and it goes back to that kind of chaos magic idea, which I prefer to call it experimental magic versus chaos. Chaos just seems like disordered, and I've always had a problem with that being the label for the kind of magic that I do. So I call it like experimental magic, like when you try things and you are open to different perspectives. And for me, that has always informed how I do anything in this realm. Divination, I find it interesting to think of like the information universe model of divination, and that when you introduce randomness and intention, you generate useful data. And maybe that's because the universe is built of information, and that's like a tool of hacking a little bit. So that's a good metaphor. But I'm also, when I do work with divinities, or when I work with the planetary intelligences of the Arbitel or something like that, it feels very real. And I could easily go, well, these things are real entities. Or I could say these all exist in my head, like Lon Milo DuQuette's
it's all in your head. You just
it's all in your head. You just don't know how big your head is.
Totally.
But it's okay to not buy into either one of those. You know, it's okay to think maybe it is all in my head, and my head is a lot bigger, like he says, or maybe there are these entities do have a real existence outside of me, but it's okay to not be sure. And that's how I teach when I teach tarot, divination, magic, anything like that. Or like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to say, this is how it works or this is why it works. The key is, does it provide useful information to you? Or if you're doing magic and ritual, does your life get better? Is your life more interesting? Are you having experiences that you enjoy? You know, like it's not just whether you do a spell to get more money and then suddenly, you know, something weird happens and you have more money. That's great. You know, that's fine. That's fun. But it's also like, is your life becoming more interesting? Are you meeting more interesting people? Are you growing intellectually? Are you growing spiritually? So for me, the key is just like remain open. You know, I'm cool with anyone who finds their path, their tradition, and they're really, you know, it works for them and it's just what they believe. That's cool. I'm not that person. I am a person who is always like trying to take things apart or to look a little deeper or look at that way of thinking about magic and divination, or look at it this way and take pieces from different thinkers and ideas. And, you know, it's a way of growing. It's a way of exploration. It's just part of me has never been able to say, okay, I work within this paradigm and that's the way it is. And this is what I believe. I'm just too intellectually curious.
Greetings, it's me, Alexa from the future. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We're going to be hearing more from Michael M. Hughes in just a little bit here, including the history of the tarot and getting into the magician archetype and the stage magician, my sort of obsession about the trickster and the idea of the sacred trap that comes up in this sort of like liminal bit of bullshit or trickery that gets the ball rolling for us. This is actually something we discussed a little bit in episode 10, way back in the day, with Dr. Rob C. Thompson. Shout out to him and all of the alchemical actors from Occult Confessions and the Dark Pool podcasts. There's some really interesting stuff in there. There was another conversation that I had with Rob C. Thompson about conspiracy thought and the occult conspiracy, which is in episode 27, which I think is actually really relevant to today's conversation as well, in terms of kind of getting one's mind around the types of thought which has gained a lot of political momentum in recent years, which is a sort of cyclical thing. We've seen this before, of course. And I'll put links to those episodes in the show notes. Really stoked to be getting into the Green Sphere ritual on the 8th of June. I'm going to be conducting a pretty rad, high-powered ceremony that's a new version of something that I did last year that people were really into. And we're going to be bringing the fire as we raise a bunch of energy and send it where it needs to go. If people are into participating, you can check out the show notes for a link to the instructions for the solo or remote version of it. You could do it with friends if you wanted to. Definitely suitable for a practitioner of any level. It mostly consists of reading the statement of intent, reading a psalm to Hecate that I wrote, and then the Green Mushroom Project statement of resistance, and lighting a candle with the hypho sigil. So very basic stuff that most people could probably manage if they're into it. And depending on how this goes, this might be something that we decide that we want to revisit in the future. We will see. Really excited to be discovering book 22 of the Green Mushroom Project, 23 Bibliomancy Scripture. As this episode is released, I think it will be around the same time we'll be doing that. I wanted to go ahead and share books 17 through 21 with you all. These lines were arrived at via participants bringing whatever book they wanted or felt wanted to participate in the operation, and taking the 23rd line of the 23rd page and adding it to our spreadsheet. We then rolled dice to determine what line order they will be arranged in. And we read our newly discovered book and perform exegesis. Okay, so this is book 17. So was I, he said. Was in fact second nature. Their reggae ain't shit. She emphasizes the logic of care, the design of emotion, so usually. Hadn't he been? He wanted to grab hold of something, quick, before he sank. Drink a glass of cold water without making an act. Firms him in the belief that reduced awareness is the... Book 18. This work. Now he had astonished the art world with works which are down in chunks and the wind blowing a hurricane. World health is on my ass again. We need a policy on use. Beings, mainly evil to them. Book 19. Body, analogous, if not identical with the Kundalini serpent, thinned sliver of God's fallen tongue or its bloody song, where, as Gimbutas writes, shrines of one kind over another are so, would offer us teachings, support, and healing. Sadly, this is multi-dimensional ripples in a vast sea of possibilities. We can, when he finished, he held the note out toward me. We shifted to focus on what we long for and love, rather than... Book 20. Them. To the side were several people in work. Heavens, we speak in each case of those things so designed, and as far as we conceive. Muerte that I impart to you here with La Niña, the girl, as she is often, when we work ourselves to exhaustion, we tell our children. Book 21. And Demeter, sent by her father to retrieve Persephone from Hades. There is a related problem with, the cats began to search for me through the wood, and they were not finding the degree to which I am proud, /delighted, /smug when I am right, is the degree to which I will suffer when I am wrong. Vindicated. If I don't need to take credit, I don't need to take blame. In their field, any organization they could build by and for. All right, interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to discovering the next book, 22, and next month, the final book, book 23. Thanks so much to everybody who's been participating in the Green Mushroom Project 23 Bibliomancy Scripture. If you'd like to participate next month, go ahead and grab the book that you think might want to participate and a couple of D10s if you have polyhedral dice. If you don't have polyhedral dice, we have an electronic version for you, so no worries there. All right, I'm going to be back to do listener mail and shoutouts and give you some updates about other cool stuff we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project, as well as offering some final thoughts about activism and magic and whatnot. But now, let's go ahead and get back into my conversation with Michael M. Hughes. Hey, it's Lexa from the Lux Occult podcast. I want to tell you about a new update to the trinary sigil generator at chaostarot.com. The bulk of this update was for normie shit like design, navigation, logic, and user experience, which was long overdue, I'm told. Each tool has a new About page, in case the tech is new to you. You'll also notice each tool has its own URL now, so you can link to exactly what you want. There are also options for dark mode, left-handed navigation, and accessibility font for dyslexia. Cheers! Some of the existing tools got feature updates along the same lines, with new options for tarot and runes, a mobile-friendly word method, full steps for all the rituals, and some background images for your sigils. Also, all the random elements have been updated to use the Mercenary Twister algorithm. Now, it wouldn't be an update without adding a few new tools, so in keeping with the normie theme, most of them involve subverting more common concepts for use in occult workings. We've got playing cards, a coin toss, a magic 8-ball, dice rollers, dice divination, a lotto picker, keyboard sigils, Morse code, Braille, NATO phonetic, sign language, Zener cards, Android Dreams Tarot, the 8-circuit model of consciousness, and also in the mix is the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance. So that's just the new stuff. Trinary has a bunch of other tools as well that I use all the time. Go and check it out. It's a fun and free way to fuck around and find out. Hey, what's up? I'm Lexa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah. So, in kind of continuing on with this idea of like how you approach teaching and stuff, I'm hoping we could get into your view about the tarot and its history and maybe disabuse people of some of the notions that are floating around out there about its supposed origins.
Yeah, that's one of the first things I teach in all of my courses is the history of tarot, because there is just so much misinformation and garbage out there, and it just won't go away. You know, it's like roaches in your apartment, you know, you just stomp them out, but they just keep coming. So learning the history, I think, is critical to avoiding a lot of the nonsense out there. I mean, first of all, you know, for decades, there have been books that say tarot, you know, goes back to ancient Egypt, or, you know, the Roma, or what was once referred to as the Gypsies. And all of this is rooted in like misinformation that was printed before people really knew what they were talking about. A lot of it is just confabulation by occultists in the, 18th and 19th centuries, who just made a lot of shit up.
And at the time, like, that was like the hotness, right? People all were like, had this real fetish, and it's a cool aesthetic, right? The Egyptian stuff is very, very cool. I can get why people are into it. And that was sort of like the hotness of the day, as far as I understand.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bunch of esoteric Freemasons who just, they were fascinated, like people still are, about ancient Egypt and ancient cultures, but like the Rosetta Stone hadn't been found yet. So they could just make up anything. Like, this is what hieroglyphics mean. And it turned out to be, what they thought were these, sacred ancient wisdom in hieroglyphics was like, hey, that guy owes me 11 shares of wheat, or things like that.
So much of just keeping track of, how much grain this dude has and how much taxes he owes. Yes, all of that.
Exactly. So, but it took hold because it's like romantic and it's exciting to think that the tarot originated as these gold plates inside the pyramid that had these ancient hermetic lessons written on them and things like that. But it's not true. Tarot originated as a card game, and it was just about playing cards. It was like a game. Tarot was a game that was kind of like bridge. So people sat around and bet money, and the church didn't like that because the church, wanted you to put your money in the collections basket instead of, spending it. But it was a game mostly of nobility, because cards at that point, Tarot originated when these cards had to all be hand painted. So they were expensive, they were a luxury, and they came out of a Christian culture. This was 15th century Europe, and it was Catholic. It was Roman Catholic, and it was Christian. And there had been, this is also the time of the Renaissance. So there was some, growing interest in ancient, Greek culture, specifically, and lots of texts were being translated. So there was some sort of incursion, and you could see it in the art of the day. A lot of Christian sculpture was just basically a clone of ancient Greek sculpture, but it just used Jesus instead of Dionysus and things like that. So it's not to say that there wasn't an understanding of like pagan culture and iconography and things. But if you look at the earliest tarot decks, they're just Christian. There's the Last Judgment card. There's the Pope. What now is the Hierophant was a Pope card.
There's a
So
Popus too, which is interesting
there's a
because I don't think
Papess,
we've ever
yeah.
seen a real Popus in the world, which is kind of an
Right.
interesting thing too.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we could spend a whole show talking about that card, but there's some people who think it was based on the legend of Pope Joan,
Hmm.
who was essentially discovered to, she was, kind of passing as a man until the legend goes she like, a baby just kind of dropped out of her in the church.
Oops.
Oh, wow. I think
Did I do that?
maybe Pope Joan is Pope John or something.
Fascinating. Yeah, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
And there's also some of the iconography of the Papess is found in the mother church. So
Yeah.
there are images of a woman wearing like a papal crown, but she represents the mother church.
The church
That's
is
kind
right.
of where
Okay.
I think I sort of lean versus the Pope Joan, although there's some great arguments made for Pope Joan. But the point is that this, it particularly, makes me laugh when people shun tarot because it's pagan or it's satanic or something like that. And I always get a kick out of telling these people, like, no, this.
Well, this is your guys' thing.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. And even in the Waite Smith deck, the deck that everyone knows and sees, in TV and movies and things like that, it has like explicitly Christian
Mhm.
iconography in it. And that's because Arthur Waite was very Roman Catholic. There's the Ace of Cups, has the Holy Spirit as a dove,
Yeah.
carrying the host
Yeah.
down into the chalice, and there are crosses and things like that.
Adam and Eve as the lovers, if I'm not
Exactly.
mistaken.
Yeah. And so, even the deck that everyone associates with witches and paganism and things like that is still has like it's stuffed. And the iconography of the majors, the major arcana, it all comes from this Christian playing card deck. So that's, that blows people's minds because tarot has become so associated with witches and pagans. And of course, there are a lot, there are decks, explicit pagan, witchy decks and things like that. And that's great. I have no problem with that. And I love tarot, and a lot of my friends are witches and use it in a context of witchcraft and magic and paganism.
Mhm.
But the cards themselves, they're explicitly, deeply Christian. And there's even a book that came out recently that looks at using tarot through a Christian lens, and it's not about divination. It's just about like looking into yourself and specific Christian principles and ideas, things like that. And I think that's great because like that's where it came from. So I always try to like teach the history, because when you learn the history, you learn where all the other sort of baggage and myths came into the discussion of tarot. And so that's like primary. So the very first thing in all my courses, I say, let's study the history. And it's fascinating. Like, it's interesting. Like, the fake history is cool, thinking that it came from those gold tablets inside the pyramids. I mean, that's fun in like an Ancient Aliens kind of way. But the real history is also really cool.
Sure.
And it when you learn the real history, you see why we have these ideas out there, even though they're erroneous, but they're still fascinating.
Sure.
It's still cool.
And to play devil's advocate here, I mean, so much of what we see in the Christian tradition comes from the earlier pagan tradition. So, I mean, it does have that in there by way of Christianity, perhaps. So,
Sure.
depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, Christianity certainly has incorporated lots of pagan ideas and myths and all that sort of thing. So, particularly Roman Catholicism, much less so when you get to Protestantism and the Reformation and the Enlightenment. But Roman Catholic, I mean, you can walk into the Vatican and see astrological paintings and symbols and things like that. And it's always been mixed up together. So you're absolutely right. I would never say that like they're totally distinct. And some of the early tarot decks do have like, things like Hercules and things like that. So because at the time there was a lot of interest in, especially the ancient Greeks and things like that, ancient Romans. So I get the history out of the way first because it's fascinating. It's also a way to understand the history of magic, because tarot has always been entwined with magic, especially since the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, really stuck them together in a way that's become inseparable.
Yeah, they
And
really made
learning,
some filing cabinets out of a lot of different things, didn't they?
yeah, for sure. It's and so I get the history out of the way because I think that learning the history helps you understand not just the history of the cards, but the history of magic and how they've been used in divination, that sort of thing. So I like to clear that up right away. And I think my students are like really happy about that because it gives them all sorts of avenues to then explore if they want to. But you have to be grounded in the basics of history, and before you go kind of taking off on different tangents. So I get the history out of the way, but then I talk about a lot of the myths that just a lot of us don't even know where they came from, but they stick, like you have to be gifted your first deck of tarot cards.
Yeah, what's up
Like,
with that?
what the hell? Who came up with that nonsense? Like, if you want to learn about reading, just go buy yourself a deck of tarot cards and start playing with them. Like, you could wait forever. I mean, what if you live in like deep red Alabama and there's not, a new age store around anywhere?
And
Everyone
isn't
around you.
practicing magic about, practicing your own personal agency anyway?
Right.
I mean, it seems
Yeah.
it's such a strange notion to me.
It makes absolutely no sense. Like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But there's still people who are like, well, I wanted to buy a deck, but I heard you have to be gifted. And like, no, please go out and buy your deck of cards. The other thing are all these ideas about like how you have to store your cards at eye level on a shelf wrapped in silk, and you must charge them under the moonlight, and all this.
Man, I
And
must
like,
have ruined a lot of tarot decks in my life.
for real. And I mean, I'm cool with treating it as like, a magical item. But at the same time, like, you don't have to do that.
I feel like
Or,
that's like a fetishistic thing that, like, if that's your thing and that you're into that, that's cool, but I don't need to
yeah,
do
yeah.
that,
And also the idea of like energy dirtying your cards. I give readings all the time. I let people hold my deck. I let them shuffle it if they want to. I've never had like icky energy sticking to my cards. It's okay. Like, if that's your thing and that works for you, that is okay. But like, don't get hung up on that.
Mhm.
Like, they're just, a lot of times I look at them as they're just pieces of cardboard with cool images on them and ink. And the real magic happens between your brain and the brain of the other person and the conversation that you're having.
Yes, I
So
totally agree. Yeah.
I always tell people, like, if you want to incorporate ideas of energy, if you want to, if you want to work with the idea that there's a spirit behind you that is kind of, manipulating the cards and stuff like that, cool. I'm not going to tell you to do otherwise, but you don't have to believe any of that. You can sit down with those cards and a friend or someone you don't know, or yourself. And that's another thing. Yes, you can read for yourself.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, you have to read for yourself, because that's how you learn how to be more objective, instead of just going with what you want. Like, oh, does he love me? And you put down a card and it's like, it's clear he doesn't love. Well,
It's
and
the
then you
three of
try.
hearts, like, oh yeah, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, exactly. How am I going to react? Oh, that's the heartache before. And let me draw another card. I mean, we all do these things, and that's how you learn those little tricks you do yourself, instead of kind of facing, the real message that's coming out of there.
Mm.
And, so with all that said, like, tarot is a magical thing, and sometimes stuff comes out that is mind-boggling and explicit, and sometimes it's just fucking weird.
Mhm.
There was a period of, God, I don't know how long it lasted, but every single time I would do a 1 card draw. It would be death, right?
Mm.
I mean, and I've worked with tarot long enough and read professionally and things like that for so long. I know like death is not, you're gonna die, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
The
sometimes
Grim
it's pretty
Reaper's right
rad, you know.
there.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes it can be death, I mean, but this would happen with a shuffled full deck, not just like the majors, which I read majors only from most of the time.
So this is a 1 out of 76 chance rather
So
than 1 out of 20 or
right,
20.
yeah. And so I'd shuffle a deck and then I go, okay, just to make sure I'm going to shuffle it one more time, and they're like, oh, no, one more time. And I'd take that card and it would be the death card. This was multiple decks. This was shuffled, put down, picked up, shuffled again, just doing everything in my power to be as random as possible. And it got to the point where I would start laughing and I'd take that top card and put it down as a death card. And I started to get kind of freaked out, like what is going on here? So as much as I'm also, I teach people like just view this as pieces of cardboard. There is magic that happens.
Sure.
And it does, like the I Ching, as Carl Jung stated, it has kind of a personality.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the more you work with tarot, the more it really feels like there's like a personality behind this that is, in this case, I gave up trying to kind of understand what it meant and just learned to enjoy that it's just having fun with me.
Mm.
Yeah. And, weird stuff like that happens. And it's really fascinating. And the more you work with tarot or any oracle, I think the more you work with it, the more it starts to feel like there's more to it than just like a psychological explanation or, there's a something happening there that's really hard to sort of put into words.
Totally. And I know we've talked a little bit about Robert 910 Wilson before, bringing us back to like the reality tunnel thing, the idea of quantum psychology, and we can never really quite get away from that. But then whatever, getting away from that semantical issue, like there is maybe sort of like new order of magnitude of like experience that can open up with these things. Like there's this like interactions are starting to take place in ways which feel more like there's more connections than there used to be or something like that.
Yeah, I totally 100%. That's a great way to describe it. For me, the way I explain it to people is if you act as if the universe is a magical place, the universe will respond as if it's a magical place. And how much, again, as we spoke about a little bit before we started this program, I have a very strong scientific bent, and I know you do too. So there's always a part of me that's saying, okay, how much is placebo? How much am I, projecting onto things like that? And I think that's healthy. Mm-hmm. But if you start doing magic, if you start practicing magic, however you define that, things start changing. And how much of that is self-created, internal, psychological delusion on my part? I don't know, but it gets back to the thing again, like, is your world more interesting? Are you having fun?
Do you feel like you have more agency in your life? Do you feel like you have more choices in your day?
Exactly. And are there explicit objective changes too? Mm-hmm. And, I've studied psychology. I'm fascinated by the psychology of ritual. And ritual works. That's why we do it. That's why as like little children are drawn more to ritual than actual practical tasks.
Yeah.
Like kids learn rituals faster, like learn a sing-song rhyme and things like that faster than they learn like, okay, do A, B, C, things like that. It's because it works. It's like embedded in being human. And, study after study shows that like the basketball player that does a little ritual before his free throw shots scores better. And people who do a little ritual before they take a quiz or a test perform better. It works. There's a reason. Like, even if you dismiss all the woo, this shit works. if you incorporate rituals into your life, you will see real changes happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't keep doing it if it didn't work, right? Like it's not just for fun. It is fun,
Right.
but it's also like this is a
Yeah.
lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of concentration, and a lot of
Right.
other things too. And so, yeah, people wouldn't do it if it didn't
Yeah. And
do
there's
something, you know?
there's nothing wrong with fun, you
Mhm.
know, like if it's fun to do a ritual, you know, if it's fun to contact a planetary intelligence using some grimoire, it's fun, you know, I mean,
Mhm.
okay, you know, maybe the truck isn't pulling up and dumping out bags of money on your doorstep, but if it's interesting, like some of that sort of work, like with spirits or entities or whatever you want to call it, like, is it practical? I don't know. Like, is it interesting? Like,
Mhm.
is it like when I feel a connection with something that Neil deGrasse Tyson would say is just strictly my imagination?
Mhm.
But if I'm feeling something different from that, if I'm engaged, if I'm fascinated, if I'm just having fun, there's that criticism of magic. Oh, you're just LARPing, you know? Well, fuck it, man. You know, I mean, if I'm LARPing and I'm enjoying LARPing, then it's okay.
So,
You
and
know?
actually, yeah, thank you. And I think that that whole thing is kind of like sad. It's like, okay, well, what does your real magic look like then, dude? Why don't you show me
Right.
that? Like, so yeah, getting away from that though. But I think there's something interesting in this idea of play or of like, of the magic trick, like the stage magic trick as
Hmm.
being something which can be like an initiating factor too.
Oh yeah.
But this was the weird obsession thing that I was hoping to ask you about
Oh yeah.
because I
Good.
see this reflected in the sort of tarot archetype of the magician, who is
Hmm.
sometimes this kind of like confidence man, like with this three-card Monty game outside of the
Hmm.
gates of the temple or out of the mystery. Like he's kind of like not really part of it, but he also will sort of like get you to the door to meet the
Right.
high priestess or whatever. So, and I think that there's something really interesting in this idea of like of trickery or of bullshit. Like the trickster
Hmm.
archetype comes up for me here too. I think it was Lewis Hyde that wrote the book Trickster Makes This World, where this is explored a little bit about how these kind of like mistakes, these like little bits of chaos in our reality are really being these like generative forces and stuff. And so I'm hoping we could get into a little bit of that territory.
Oh yeah, now you're talking.
Okay, right
This
on.
is so this is a subject I love.
And I
Again,
know that you're an author as well, and so I'm wondering if there might be some stuff in there for you as well.
yeah, wow, this is my jam.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we'll have to come back and like get into this hardcore because this is kind of my jam right now, and it's
Oh,
taking me to a
good.
lot
All
of
right.
strange places with like the phenomena and all kinds of other weird things going on. So,
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to recommend a book if you may have read it called The Trickster and the Paranormal by George Hansen, who is a magician, who is also a like stage magician,
hmm.
but he talks about the paranormal and the tricksterish aspects of the paranormal in a way. It's like a really foundational book for the way I think and approach the paranormal.
Hmm.
So that is a wonderful book if anybody's listening and like really digs this, you know, particular path that we're on. But for me, the idea of the magic trick and the magician, and like you said, the early magician card in the tarot is a guy who, yeah, he's just sets up a table and puts some balls out on it, and he's got a wand because he's drawing your attention away with the wand while he's holding this other ball in his hand. So he's a trickster. He's the guy that sets up the table at the fair and, you know, takes your money
Mhm.
and fools you. But magic, the idea of the magician is such like a rich and yeah, you're right. Like we should take a whole
I'm
hour to
so
talk
here
about
for this.
this.
Yeah.
um, and having, like I said, having been a magician and having seen the power and how, you know, magic can change people's consciousness in ways that can be very manipulative
Mhm.
and can harm people.
Yes.
But there's also the magic that can elevate and can open the minds of people. And Alejandro Jodorowsky, the cult filmmaker, who's also just one of my heroes as far as tarot goes, and his book on tarot is just fabulous. I think everyone who even dabbles in the cards should read it. The Way of Tarot, the spiritual teacher in the cards, it's called. He developed these techniques, and he calls it psychomagic. And what it is, like, someone will come to him and say, man, I'm really having a hard time in my career, or like my relationship's really going down the toilet. And he'll say something like, okay, go to the nearest river, get some water and put it in a cup. I'm making this up, by the way. This isn't an actual thing. And go back, say these 3 words over and over as you go back home. And when you get back home, I want you to put your feet in a bucket and pour some earth in the bucket, things like that. And he says it causes remarkable changes in people, even though it seems nonsensical. But he talks about, and I've seen this in person, when a shaman in like a traditional or indigenous culture, sometimes when they're doing a healing, they will do a trick. Like they'll do a magic trick, and he calls it the sacred trap. And I love that term, and I try to incorporate that sometimes myself. And the idea is that this shaman, this healer, this magic worker will do a trick, and that changes the consciousness of the person that they're healing or that they're working with. And what it does, it's that moment of like, whoa, that moment of astonishment, that moment of like, holy shit, what just happened? Was that real? That opens their mind so that the real healing, like the real magic, can step in and take the place. That's a mind-blowing thing to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to how a lot of magic works. And the trick, the fact that it's a trick is also kind of liminal, It's that moment of thinking, like, did that coin really vanish? Did that flower really just, open up? It's that moment where you're like in between, where you're thinking, is it real? Was that a trick? That's a really powerful liminal space. And I think really powerful magicians know how to work within that space. And that's why sometimes tricks are part of the real magic experience.
Fuck yeah, that is so beautifully put, and I would love to get deeper into this territory at some point. I want to be respectful of your time and everything, and there was one last thing that I was hoping we could get into, because I think this is something that is really important, just kind of tying together all of what we've talked about today, really, is this idea of, in order for us to confront some of what we're needing to confront in the world, we first need to make changes to ourselves, and all roads lead back to the self is like the originating point of all action in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so I really loved some of what you had to say along those lines in terms of like how magic can help us in that way and to offer us, tools or roads towards solutions or things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's another great question with a lot.
Sure.
Yes.
Immediately,
really, my mind starts going in like 100 different directions. But yes, I mean, magic as a spiritual practice, that is the key for me. I think when a lot of people get involved in magic, they just want to see if they can make things happen. And that's great. Like that's been part of magic.
Yeah.
Since that's why we do it.
That's why we do it in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Right. Like, I really want to get this job as an example. Like that's how I've used magic before. Man, I really want to get this job. And what's interesting to me is, and what kind of changed my perspective a little bit, but just how I do magic is that, you might do this like incredible ritual. Yeah, like I did. I was working in all different ways to the absolute best I could to get this particular job that I wanted. And it was in an industry that I thought, this is perfect for me. I've got a lot of, I was in psychedelics, put it that way.
Oh, cool.
And this was kind of at the beginning of when psychedelics were becoming sort of mainstreamed. So I was working this doing everything, and always, of course, like you do the practical work too,
Sure.
Oh, I want this job. I'm just going to do rituals all day. No, you got to like
You got to apply
get
to
your
it.
resume. You got to like talk to somebody, all this. But it
Sure.
really felt like this was where my energy was going. I was getting signs that it was working. Everything was falling into place. And then it didn't work. Like the big person at the organization, like totally ghosted my ass. And I'm like, what is happening here? And because it really felt like, there were little signs here and there, and it really felt like all the pieces were falling into place.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, like, other things worked out, and I look back on it and I'm like, damn, I dodged a bullet.
Sure.
Because this would have been terrible from everything that unfolded afterwards, like the vulture capitalism aspects that are like rife in that industry now. Like I saw that, like I would have been miserable. Like it would have torn me apart ethically to be involved in this role that I was like, I thought that's exactly where I needed to be. So did that ritual work? That's like, and so I started taking apart a lot of the ways I was doing magic. And I was like, you know what? And this was kind of a natural evolution anyway. I was realizing I was doing more like theurgy. Like I was doing magic to sort of make myself a more conscious, conscientious person, to improve my relationships with people, to understand myself better. And like the big mystery, we get focused on like external things. It's natural because that's what our world is about. But I think the real mystery is like understanding ourselves. And so much of my magic began to like focus on that mystery. And I really felt in sync with a lot of the early theurgists. And, all of my interest in like non-dual, Eastern, like Tantra and Buddhism and things like that, it all started to kind of gel. And I'm like, magic is like for understanding the self, the biggest mystery of all. Like when you start seeing through the illusions of yourself, when you start like taking apart the ego and looking for that like eternal aspects of the self, the world changes around you because your way of engaging with the world changes. So it's really weird. And, like most people, I started in magic to see if I can manipulate the world around me to change it, when ultimately the natural progression of how I do magic is more about changing my responses to the world and changing how I understand and engage with the world. So, that job example is just sort of one aspect that really drove it home for me, is that, yeah, Matt, it's like I still do rituals for things, objective things, but so much more of it now is just more understanding myself and making myself better able to navigate the world. And I find that the more you focus on the self and like trying to change yourself, the world does change around you too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
it's,
thank you.
yeah. I've become more focused on rituals to kind of change myself versus change the world. And paradoxically, that does change the world, whether that's because my way of navigating. I've always looked at magic as sort of like surfing or sailboating. I've never surfed and I don't know how to sail a boat. I've been on sailboats, but the idea of like a surfer is like you're just kind of paddling and you're waiting for the right wave. And then you just kind of change your balance a little bit. It's like magic is more about navigating what you're given versus making that wave appear or changing the winds to take your sailboat. It's more about like navigating the sails to get where you want to get.
Or like this Taoist like action of inaction or something, or like
exactly. Yeah. And it dovetails with a lot of like specifically, like tantra, non-dual tantra, things like that. Like, so, it becomes less of an idea of changing the world and more changing yourself. Although again, what kind of propelled me to virality and helped me to get my thoughts and ideas out there is still direct engagement with the world. Through, there's a terrible person who's, in the highest seat of power in the world, and we've got to get them out. But at the same time, if you're not working on yourself, you're not going to be able to do that. So like, yes, it's still important to engage and be part of the world around you and do everything in your power to make things better for yourself, for other people, for sentient beings, wherever you want to draw that line. But at the same time, the more you work on yourself, the more able you are to engage in that work too.
Fuck yeah. So you have a course about tarot magic coming up, is that right?
Yes, it's actually out.
Oh, it is out. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I released it late last year, and it really is. If you if anything I'm saying kind of resonates with anybody listening to this, all this is incorporated in this course. I have a foundational tarot course too, if there's anyone who just wants to get into tarot. And like I said a little bit ago, like it's the history, so you learn all the history, but you also learn techniques to read that aren't grounded in specific traditions. Like you don't have to be a hermetic Kabbalist to read tarot cards. You don't need to learn astrology, all that sort of stuff. You can just start reading cards. So I teach people how to do that in that foundational course. But the tarot magic course is what I'm super excited about, because it's a course about magic and how to do magic that, number one, you don't have to be a witch. You don't have to be anything.
Yeah, I've heard you use the word secular magic before, which I like.
Yeah, it's secular. Now the thing is, the magic in this course comes out of the tarot itself and the tarot archetype and imagery. So you can be of any spiritual flavor or persuasion and use this because it comes from the cards. It's not from stuff people stuck on the cards, the Kabbalistic tree of life and things like that. This comes from the early archetypes of the cards. Like you said, the magician, death, the sun, the moon. These things transcend spiritual traditions or teachings. They're just there. They're archetypes. So the course is built on a system of magic. Now, it incorporates things from other traditions. So you learn how to make a talisman. You will learn how to make an altar with tarot cards and things like that. So it has elements that are part of all magical traditions, but it is secular. So you don't have to buy into any spiritual system. You can just use the energies and the archetypes that come through these images on the cards. And I love it. It's my real contribution. I think it's something that I've really spent years and years sort of trying different things and practicing things. And it comes from my understanding of a lot of different magical systems, but it's kind of universal stuff. So that's why I love it. Yeah, I'm cool. As you could tell, I'm super excited.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
To
and
share
it kind of
this
sounds,
stuff.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm curious, is there going to maybe be a book about this topic coming somewhere down the line?
Yeah. I'm talking to a couple publishers. I'm also wondering, I may just put this out there myself, because I think this is sort of universal material. It doesn't fit into what a lot of publishers are looking for. It uses a lot of the older decks, particularly the Marseille Tarot. And a lot of publishers are like, well, no one wants to buy a book about the Marseille Tarot. It's got to be about the Waite Smith or whatever. Books using older decks don't really sell. But for me, this is kind of important, people working with these older decks, there's just something different about it. All that esoteric cruft, I call it, that's
I love that word.
It's in the Waite Smith, and every deck that's come after that can be a distraction from the real power of those archetypes. Somebody's like, well, wait, is that a symbol of Venus down there? I've always found that sort of thing to be a distraction when it comes to at least the way that I read tarot. So if a publisher is not that interested in it, I think I'm just going to like put this stuff out there because I think it's so helpful and useful and different. And I think people will really enjoy it.
All right on. Well, stoked to hear about how that project goes and everything. And where can people find your work?
You can find my tarot and magic courses at theartofmagicalliving.com. You can also sign up for my newsletter there. You can also just Google my name, Michael M. Hughes, and find a lot of my publications, my books. My website is michaelmhughes.com. That has links to the books. I've written some novels too. It's all there. Mr. Google will lead you to me.
Right on. Always ask this. I usually wait till the end because people usually don't want to, and it lets me off the hook. But do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
Wow. I mean, I do. I feel like there are questions that, would be better if we just kind of sat down and chatted. It feels to me like we're very much on the same wavelength, from your questions and your, the mention of like chaos magic and things like that, the fact that you're like very science-based in your thinking, I just want to thank you. Like I do a lot of podcasts, I do a lot of, interviews and things like that, but it's felt really like this has been one of the more, I don't know, it's just, I feel like the way we think magically seems to really click, and there's like, I don't know, it's just been an interesting interview. The questions that you have asked are so much better than the usual questions I get. So I just want to say thanks for this opportunity. And, if you ever want to delve into anything else, I would love to talk more.
I would love that as well. And thank you so much for saying, I really appreciate that. And I've really appreciated a lot of what you've had to say, not just here, but on other shows as well. And
good.
A lot of really, I think, common sense, helpful things that, I just really appreciate hearing. And I really appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to keep you a little bit over what we agreed upon and everything. I'm sure I could continue this conversation indefinitely.
Well, that's the sign of a good interview. Like I super enjoyed it, and again the level of questions is like, oh yeah, I love talking about that. Thank you. And so really appreciate the opportunity. And there are lots of podcasts, as you know, on these subjects, and I really think you are on the right track for what you're doing. It's very you've elevated the discourse. So
thank you.
That's
high fucking praise. I will take it. Thank you.
Oh, good. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Well deserved.
So, could you, if you wouldn't mind, leave the listeners and I with some parting thoughts or words of advice?
Yeah. We're living in a time that is unprecedented for access to magic. No one has ever had the wealth of resources that we have today. I mean, just the text that are available, just the scholarship that is available. I'd like to suggest that anyone that's interested in magic is really, really take time to study the history. There are some great books out now that are just basically cover the history of magic. That's what I wish I had done before I started becoming involved in the practice of magic. Because if you understand the history, you see where everything comes from, and you see how it changes. You see how much magic is adapted to cultures, how cultures change magic, sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst. And if you know the history, you can start pulling at the threads that are in that tapestry, the threads that follow through history. That's what changed my approach to magic. That's why I call what I do experimental magic. That's why I'm not like stuck in one tradition, and why I think immersing yourself in a tradition is a good idea, but not to become stuck in a tradition. I think people And studying the history of magic, you start to see those threads that transcend cultures, that transcend time. That's how I think you can discover your own magic. And you can, I mean, to me, God, I've really kind of petered out here, but let me see if I could start
Well,
that
I was
again.
gonna say I couldn't have said it better myself. This is one of the approaches that I like to use personally, and yeah, I just love it.
Yeah. So I guess to sort of pull it together, if you study the history of magic, you start to see the threads
Mm.
that are part of that bigger tapestry. And those threads have always been there. Like the pattern of the fabric will change, but there are certain threads that you can like find and pull on. And if you can find those threads and make them your own, that's a way to develop your own style of magic. That's the way to like make the magic yours. That's how you can do magic that is like truly your own. And that's how people innovate, you know, and that's how we grow and evolve. So I would encourage everybody, like, put down your books of your tradition that you're working in and just start at the beginning. Like, go all the way back to the beginning. Find a book that's like comprehensive and scholarly about magical practices. Find stories from other cultures and see how their magic worked and how it all kind of comes together, and look for those threads and pull on those threads and make those your own. And that's the magic that's going to work best for you, not something someone else has created, not something that, you know, some group has been doing for 100 years. Make it your own. That's the most effective magic, is the magic that comes from you.
Fuck yeah, dude. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. This is like, you know, there's lots of ways to spend a Sunday afternoon, but like talking about this stuff is my favorite thing. So I appreciate the opportunity to do so today.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So reach out anytime, for real.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop recording before I get too awkward.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thanks so much to Michael M. Hughes for joining me. It was rad getting into a lot of that territory that we covered. I really enjoyed the conversation. I feel like Michael would probably be a pretty good person to study magic with because he seems cognizant of the ways in which things can go wrong. It can be easy to charge ahead with optimism when one is blind to the possible pitfalls one might encounter, and this can lead to a lot of harm, even if that harm is unintentional, right? I really appreciate a lot of what Michael had to say about approaching magic with the knowledge that it can, and often is, you know, look at marketing and advertising and stuff like that, used to manipulate people, and that it can be dangerous for that reason, which is something that we can see plenty of examples of in group situations where like things like meditation or initiation technology being used as like a way of getting people under the influence of a group and things like that, which it could be argued is what, you know, especially initiation tech is designed for, you know, way back in the early days of humanity. It's only manipulation or coercion or whatever if people aren't informed about how it works and why they're being asked to do it. One can't properly consent to something if one is not properly informed on what that something is and its potential benefits and risks and all of that. But it's cool and interesting stuff to investigate, so that consent piece I think is really important. So this is something that comes up in our discussions as we lay the foundations for Void House, a new experiment in creating a consent-forward magical space in which to conduct more serious magical work both in person and online. Stoked to be continuing to talk with people and gather different points of view about what works well and what doesn't in magical groups. We can take what works from the past and learn from what didn't, leaving it behind. So I'm really hoping to cast a sort of wide net and get a variety of different perspectives about this, and hopefully bring you all some cool and useful conversations in the process. The idea of having more education and discussions about consent in magical spaces is something that people seem to be really enthusiastic about, which I'm really stoked for. I'll be starting a summer course about leadership and consent soon, which I'm really excited about, and we'll be consulting with a variety of different people and sources as we build Void House into something robust, functional, and hopefully adaptable by others who want to work in similar ways. I recently read the book Cultish by Amanda Montell, which is about language and influence. In the book, she mentions that consent is the component which keeps things healthy in a lot of cases. So this is a really fun read. I highly recommend it, as well as her other book, The Age of Magical Overthinking. Thanks to Dave Neal for the recommendations. We've been having some interesting and helpful conversations about consent and spotting abuse tactics. in addition to other cool conversations about magic and like random silly bullshit that always takes place on the Discord server. So if consent and all that is a topic you're into talking about, I know I'm into it, that is available there for you. And you can message me for a link to the server. We're going to be getting into some listener mail and shoutouts in just a moment, but let me jump the gun on that a bit and give a shout out to Tom Banger, who is kind enough to have a talk with me about his work with Temple of Psychic Youth and share some stories about things that worked and things that maybe could have been gone better or handled differently in the past, as well as some good takeaways. Although, as we will hear in my conversation with Tom, things were not perfect back in the day with Topi. The work has been an important influence on me and a lot of my friends and magical associates and on occultism in general, and perhaps in society in general, it could be argued. The 23 Bibliomancy project is sort of a shout out, an homage to some of that, and a lot of my audio magic is very Topi inspired as well. The Psychic Bible is, of course, a touchstone for many things as well. As we move forward in time, I think it's important to always be willing to take what works from the past, as I said, and leave the rest behind. We don't need to throw out babies with bathwater, and we don't need to unnecessarily constrain ourselves by adhering to traditions that no longer serve, or ways of thinking that we're wanting to move away from, or whatever it is. It was really cool and interesting to hear some of Tom's recollections as the person coordinating the efforts of the North American branch of Topi, and I very much appreciate him taking the time to chat with me and for his candor as well. I'm hoping to have more conversations along similar lines with people about their experiences with magical groups in the near future, so if you have perspectives that you'd like to share about that, let me know. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or at luxoccultpod on Instagram. Not 100% sure when that episode with Tom will be out yet. I've been working my ass off recording a bunch of rad content, but I will of course let you all know. If you like the show and you're into what I've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy break from me. Making this thing is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one person, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thank you so much to the folks who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all of your fellow cult members and your knitting circle associates about it, if those are different. Tell your pool maintenance person, your paper delivery youth, and all of your nosy neighbors about it, as well as everyone you meet at the next rainy day picnic you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you very much to the people who are already doing that. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button or alarm, whatever it is on your app, so that you can get updates when new episodes come out. Alright, as I said earlier, check out the show notes for instructions on how to conduct the solo version of the Green Sphere ritual on June 8th, 2024. And if you end up taking part in that, I would love to see pictures. It would be cool to put a little collection or something together if it works out. Lots of fun and free activities planned on the Green Machine Discord server. Our chat about chemonosis and harm reduction, led by Damien, was rescheduled to the 24th, which is tonight if you're hearing this the day it comes out. On June 28th, I'll be hosting a special Fungal Friday chat in which we revisit our Project Specs working, which is about creating enchanted sunglasses to help you see through propaganda a la John Carpenter's movie They Live. We're going to be discussing pop magic, hypersigils, and conducting an experiment involving collaborative storytelling. We're in interesting waters with this particular project, and I'm curious to see how sort of steerable this ship might be, as it were. We'll fuck around and find out. We're going to be doing some fun astral temple stuff coming up too. That's in the planning stages, as is a project for doing circle work towards personal development using tech adapted from Mankind Project, recovery spaces, and other sources. Is going to be part of Void House when it's ready to be launched, and is going really well so far in its testing stages. Thanks to Shane for putting all of that together. And shout out to all of the jerks in the jerk circle. In general, join us for our weekly Friday chats, our monthly rune study group, and 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter book club hosted by Laura, as well as for 23 Bibliomancy, as you heard earlier. Alright, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. In regard to the last episode featuring Albert Scheel and Omega, Zedem4 writes, I was already excited to hear about Icelandic magic, but nonviolent communication was a game changer when about 15 years ago my partner and I were going through some toxic, nonsensical arguing constantly. I feel that my need for being heard is not being met, instead of, you make me feel crazy, it shifted perspectives, so I could take more ownership and responsibility for my feelings and make sense of them. No more blame games. Also, it often helps for understanding kids' strange behaviors, usually just needs that aren't being met. So I thanked Xenon 4 and asked if it was cool if I shared this with you all, and he added that I kept that one-page list of needs for quite a long time to refer back to. Like, why am I feeling this way? Oh yeah, it's an unmet need. And whoa, I just realized I'm chatting with Luxa from the future. I think I just earned my time travel merit badge. I was sad to miss the Fungal Friday discussion about the next evolution of the Green Mushroom Project. I had a lodge meeting I had to attend. Well, thank you so much, Student 4, for the missive, and no worries to you or anyone else who missed out on that chat and wanted to see it. There is a video of the presentation now available on the Lux Occult RSS feed and on YouTube. It's actually the bonus episode right before this one. Alright, shout out to Relics. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with me. I appreciate it. Shout out to Gnosos on Instagram. Stoked that the show has been useful and led you down new and interesting avenues of exploration. Stay curious, my friend. Fuck yeah. Shout out to Weird Road on Instagram. Thank you for taking those very fun pictures of me the other night. I'm stoked to share them. And shout out also to Patrick J. Worden, who has answered a Spotify question that I posed about how do coins feature in your practice. Patrick writes, no legal tender involved, but I have a 1/2 ounce silver coin and a 1 ounce copper coin glued to either side of a medal that I won. I use it as a charge plate for amulets and stones. Alright, fuck yeah, I love that. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you to everybody who sent in missives and kind words. I really appreciate it, and all of your missives are appreciated whether or not they end up in the listener mail. I'm not always organized enough or what have you to get all of them, but they are all appreciated nonetheless. If you would like to send thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod. Thank you so much to everybody who's been showing their support and enthusiasm for the show and my other work. I really appreciate it. There's some very exciting stuff coming down the line that I'm really stoked to share about, but I think I've kept you here long enough. Perhaps this episode has inspired you to take action of some kind and you want to get on with that work. Godspeed to you, my friends, if that's the case. I'll leave you all with these closing thoughts. Michael M. Hughes talks about how the spell he created to bind that orange clown was, for some people, a chance to exert a small amount of personal agency in a situation where they felt like they had known, to get the ball rolling. Magic is a technology of freedom, or it can be, as Issa Nakazawa and I talked about in episode 79. I hadn't realized this until finding out about Michael M. Hughes' work, but there's a lot of interesting parallels there for me in terms of how I approach and think about magic. Even though our relative approaches to magical activism might look a little bit different, you know, he has the spell to bind Trump, I've got the mushroom thing going on, all of, different approaches to perhaps similar goals. I think there could be a lot to be said for applying a variety of different strategies to a situation at once. In Michael's book, Magic for the Resistance, it's noted that cultivating resilience is a really important part of being able to stick it in for the long haul, to really be able to dig in your heels and fight the long fight. Sometimes it takes a really long time, and sometimes change is slow and incremental, and that can be disheartening. So it's really important to always take the time to play and to always take the time to do the things that build resilience and nurture that part of yourself that makes you strong enough to get back out there and fight. And being constantly angry and sad or scared and all of the other things that are perfectly rational reactions to a lot of what we see going on in the world, it's also, just from a physiological standpoint, exhausting. And this was also something that Aidan Wachter and I talked about in the very first episode that we spoke in, which was number 12. So to be effective, we really do have to find a way to balance. It's obviously going to look different for different people, but one of the ways that I find myself doing this is by working with the mushroom current. Everybody's way of resisting is going to look a little bit different, and that's good and valid and needed. Monoculture is not typically very robust, right? So however it looks to you, I will remind you to resist and I will read you the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance. Resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Michael M. Hughes for joining me. Find links in the show notes to his tarot courses and other work. Thanks to Nive and everyone who contributed to the Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape. Fuck around and find out part 2. And thanks to everybody who's going to be helping out with the Green Sphere ceremony. But most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Tremble before she who in tender touch turns the fiercest warriors to dust and inspires the most secret of our merry hearts, moving us to taste of blood and salty tears, and lose ourselves in the oblivion of ecstasy. Bow before she who inspires one of water, the brightest light, the morning star. Repent as she rides the dark moon's tires, and rejoice in the splendor of victorious rise. Victory. Victory to the goddess of love and order.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.